All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name's Tony Zanders. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon. I'm the founder and CEO of a new company called Skilltype. I'm honored to be here with my friend and colleague, Eleanor Cook, who's the interim head of the music library at East Carolina University. And we're here to share some conversations we've been having for the past 2 years prior to COVID about what professional development and what the conference experience could look like. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Eleanor to get us started.
Thank you. Okay, big shout out to all of you in the audience. It's good to have you all here. And this first slide is showing you a picture of the 1887 ALA conference. And the reason that I'm showing this and a few other slides similar, I would like you to imagine what it might have been like to travel in 1887. You'll notice that the picture is of men and women, and all of them are white. And of course, for many years, there were no opportunities for people of color or many other kinds of people to attend a conference like the ALA conference. So the beginnings of formal librarianship in the US can be traced back to this. And there were other groups that arose over the years to address the need for a more inclusive type of conference experience. But suffice to say, it was always a privilege to be able to travel to a conference. Here you see a picture of the first Negro Library Conference in Hampton, Virginia, 1927. The first library school that was developed for African Americans was at the Hampton University. So, you know, there was always the need for the education and the schooling that was necessary for libraries. But for many years, it was segregated. And even as late as 1970, that was the year that the Black Caucus of ALA was created. So if you could just try to imagine what it was like to travel between 1887 and 1970, it was not like what we do today. Of course, the civil rights movement and legislation paved the way for more equity in librarianship and in our greater society, but to this day, there are still issues to address. So the privilege of travel remains one of those issues. And oddly enough, the COVID-19 pandemic has flipped this issue on its head in so many ways. Next slide would be good. You can see here in 2014, a much more diverse group, but yet it's still hard to travel. All right, and then in the next slide, you'll see Eleanor and Tony. We met in the Charleston Conference in 2018. In 1887, this wouldn't have been possible. So we want to talk today about the pros and cons of what we're dealing with in 2020. Here you see the late news about the Palmer House, a large hotel in Chicago, which is declaring bankruptcy this year because of, well, I guess because of COVID, but other things perhaps. But this is one of the places when you go to the ALA conference, many people will have meetings here or stay here. I never got to stay at the Palmer House, but I certainly attended meetings at this place. It's quite opulent, as you can see. All right, so let's talk about some of the pros and cons. I'm going to start and then Tony's going to pick up. There are limitations to place-based conferences. Think about all the different people who cannot travel for one reason or another. For example, if you have a disability, it may make it very difficult for you to travel. If you feel discriminated against, it may be hard for you to travel. If you live in a rural or remote area that's far from an airport or a way to get somewhere, You might not be able to attend a conference. If you have family obligations that make it difficult for you to be away from home for any length of time, you may not find yourself going to conferences. Also, early career professionals and paraprofessionals that don't have financial support or means to pay might not be going to conferences. And we've really, hotel rooms have gotten very expensive. I would say $200 a night is the ballpark for a metropolitan hotel. And no matter whether you're early career or not, if you don't have the money or you don't have the assistance, besides a hotel room, airfares and all kinds of other travel expenses can be prohibitive. However, there are also limitations to doing it the way we're doing it today. And I don't have a slide for it, but I'm going to mention a few things and then Tony's going to pick up. When you do a conference this way, the way we're doing it today, you don't have direct face-to-face networking opportunities. You don't have direct interactions with vendors. You don't get the same cultural experiences when you travel to a place you've never been before, especially if it's a fun place. And we all know that going to a conference is not all work, that there is an element of fun to it as well, and that if it wasn't fun, we probably wouldn't do it as much. Now, our employers do not send us to conferences to have fun. We know that it's a serious business and that we're there to learn, but it doesn't hurt to have pleasant experiences when you travel. So I leave it with that. There's more to be said. And I also would like people in the audience to give us some other examples as we get into Q&A about the pros and cons that we're going to talk about. Okay?
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Eleanor, for setting up this conversation. All of this is taking place during a backdrop of a massive effort to reskill our workforce in light of what's being called the fourth industrial revolution. The World Economic Forum estimates that over 50% of our workforce will need to be reskilled by 2025. Much of this is due to the technological shifts that are taking place. New skills and new technology are being introduced to do traditional work. And all of this requires additional learning and development. Some concrete examples from other industries are listed here. Billions of dollars have been invested into reskilling, upskilling, and professional development across industries. We see examples here from the likes of Google and AT&T and PricewaterhouseCoopers. We also see over the past 3 years, the manufacturing industry as a whole investing over $26 billion in the US alone on reskilling people. And so apart from the diversity and equity and inclusion issues that were sort of created by the historical roots of professional development in our country, we now have another issue unrelated to COVID that's dealing with the need to gain new skills at a rate higher than ever before. Just to summarize, the model that was designed when ALA was first launched in 1876 has several issues. It's exclusionary. Not everyone is able to share their voice, share their expertise, share their vision for what our work is and should be. It's also homogeneous. The diversity issues in our community are well cited and well documented. It also creates inequity because in order to get promotions in an academic environment that's based on tenure and promotion, you have to be able to attend these types of sessions and earn these types of credentials. And so it creates inequity within itself. It's also cost prohibitive, as Eleanor mentioned. Something that isn't talked about as much is that in an age of privacy, the traditional model monetizes user data. And there's a lot of concern about this moving forward as we look to other industries. There's also poor design. And so to navigate, once you land from the airport or you drove in through a road trip and you're at the actual event, No one really loves what it feels like to walk around ALA convention centers. You're often late, and there's like 400 sessions. You are only interested in 6 of them. And by the time you get to the 6 that you like, you're ready to go to sleep. You can't even do the fun things that Eleanor is interested in, just described. It's also environmentally harmful for those of us looking at the green initiatives that we can do to reduce carbon footprint. The airline industry wants this to continue, but many of us don't. The other issue that is not discussed too often is that it bottlenecks expertise sharing. And so even for this session, we had to spend a few months preparing our call for proposal. Then once we submitted that proposal, it took another few months for the conference to actually take place. And by the time the presentation's actually being delivered, we're presenting material that could be 6 months to a year behind. And depending on the size of the conference, that timeline is actually longer. And so it bottlenecks expertise sharing, where sometimes what we're needing to share that we've experienced in our work, there are others who might need that information like immediately. And so there's a better way, we believe, to reduce this bottleneck. Over the past 2 years at Skilltype, we've been building a global community to tackle these exact issues. It's a pretty diverse community mixed between academic libraries, professional associations, open source communities, and others. And we're really optimistic about the potential that the library and information science community has to tackle these issues head on. One of our initial conclusions is that while seemingly separate, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are actually tightly related with professional development. And so now today we have 2 separate dialogues that are taking place, one around DEI and another around reskilling and upskilling. We believe that these 2 dialogues should actually be merged together because they have some really strong interdependencies in libraries at least. At Skilltype, we're working on this from a software perspective. We're working on a talent marketplace that has 3 components. On the first column here, you'll see what we're doing for professionals, learners, and the goal is to facilitate lifelong learning for all of us across the community. Then there's the organizational perspective, what we call Skilltype for Teams. And so organizations have a stake in this as well. They manage budgets that they have to invest for professional development on behalf of their learners and their workforce. And then lastly, but not to forget, training providers, including groups like the Charleston Conference and others. Their world has been turned upside down by COVID-19 as well. And so we're all in this together. And while things may seem competitive in other contexts, we all have to help each other figure this out in order to make it into the next 5 to 10 years of this profession. What I'd like to share today is some of the user research that we've done to address these issues. And the quickest way to explain it will be in the form of what we call personas in the user research world. So there's really 3 personas that we're discussing here. On the first, we have each of us as attendees of these trainings and workshops, we're the information professionals. We also have the libraries and organizations that are funding our training and our development to meet their strategic directions as an organization. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we have those who are producing and facilitating these wonderful opportunities for us to grow our career. So as a professional, I want to develop my skills. And this phrasing is sort of typical for user research. And what would it look like for me to do that in a modern way? Firstly, I want to access every training that was ever created, and I want to do that instantly and from anywhere. Each organization that I'm a member of gives me certain rights and privileges to gain additional training. And so my employer gives me access to certain professional development databases they have access to, like LinkedIn Learning and others on campus. But I'm also maybe a member of a professional association like NASIG or another group, maybe ALA. And by virtue of that membership, I have access to additional trainings as well. All of my training in an ideal world is contextualized based on my career goals. So today I have to sort of figure that out on my own. I have to connect the dots for myself. I have to browse the call for proceedings myself and wonder if this is a good use of my time. And even if I think it's a good use of my time, how does it fit in the context of my career goals? So these are some of the things we think about when designing a modern experience for us as learners. Now, as a library, I want to train my staff. That's why I'm at the seat. I have a seat at this table. Our managers should always know the expertise and the interests and the skill gaps across our organization. Why? Because that's the information we need to make decisions on where people go. Traditionally, people can sort of raise their hand and say, hey, I really want to go to this conference. I don't have a really strong reason why. I just love to go, and no one ever said no before. So hopefully you'll say yes this time. And in these day and age, with the austerity measures in place, that excuse really isn't going to cut it moving forward. We actually need to tie the learning we plan to do there with the organization's strategic goals. Like scholarly resources, we should have access to all trainings instantly and on demand. Again, just like our databases and other areas across scholarly communications. We should have access to this when it comes to professional development and trainings from anywhere that we are. And we should incorporate, and we want to incorporate, learning and development and the activity of all of our workforce as they learn into key personnel decisions. So perhaps instead of hiring someone from outside to do a certain task, maybe we see that someone can be trained up or reskilled right from within. And this speaks to COVID directly, as many of our institutions are under various austerity measures. Most of many include a hiring freeze of some sort. And so as a library, I not only want to train my staff, but I want to figure out a way to manage and acquire talent in a way that is more sustainable. And lastly, as a training provider, I want to facilitate trainings. Traditionally, I'm used to the in-person experience, maybe at the Palmer House, maybe in Charleston at the Galliard Center. But we're not able to do that anymore. In an ideal world, if we're just sort of starting from scratch on a whiteboard, being very imaginative, I'd love to deliver the right training to the right group of people at the right time anywhere around the world. I wouldn't prefer to be constrained to having people physically have to come to one place. If there are other people willing to pay me, the training provider, money to deliver and facilitate this training. I'd love to create a business model that increases access to our training for those who need it the most. So right now, it's not economically feasible to give all of the trainings away to free for everyone. We got to sort of rethink things where we can cover our costs, we can grow our business as a training provider, while at the same time not increasing the inequity that has been in the community historically, as Eleanor described. And lastly, all of the wonderful work we do to produce trainings, we don't really have a way to measure the impact of that today. And so ideally, we'd love to be able to know, did the training that we facilitated and brought together, did that have an impact, a positive impact on the professionals who attended, on the organizations that paid for them, and also the community at large? Are we really pushing the profession forward, sort of taking the baton from the iSchool community to continue lifelong learning and development as people enter different phases of their career in the information profession? So in closing, when we compare sort of where things have gone to where things are today, we think we can make some really strong progress by merging together two disparate dialogues that are taking place right now, one around diversity and equity and inclusion and accessibility, with reskilling and professional development. We think if we merge these, we can achieve some of the outcomes you see on the slide here. In the future, we believe professional development will be more inclusive, not about who you know and if you can get into the right room, but about what you want to know. We believe that it'll be more diverse, more representative, sort of really addressing the underrepresentation of certain demographics, and also more global. When you talk to colleagues around the world, they share many of the same needs and concerns that we have here in the States. It will also be more equitable. So we would reward people's effort and their merit and their interest in learning. Economical is another key, because cost prohibitive is a reason why many people can't attend this conference. And so borrowing some of those tenets from open access and open source and applying those to producing training. Privacy focused is one that we need to be discussing, because again, much of the data that we share with our organizations, it goes into places as a learner that we're not all that sure where it goes. And so we have some frameworks around GDPR and in the state of California around how user data should be managed, especially regarding one's career. Accessibility is another key. And so we have other frameworks like WCAG for web accessibility, and ADA compliance will be at the top of mind when designing a professional development experience. Green, the one aspect of creating a virtual experience or the right balance of virtual and in person is that we're going to do a great job reducing our carbon footprint as an industry. And lastly, creating modern creator tools that reduce the bottleneck for expertise sharing. We think that all of these are sort of tenets of a modern professional development experience, and COVID has created an opportunity for us to discuss this front and center. We'd now like to open things up for questions and discussion and chat. I wasn't able to look much at the attendee list here, and I know we also have a moderator perhaps who's been checking out questions. And so Stephanie, if you want to help us, or we can sort of browse things ourselves.
There are a few comments already that are interesting, and so the first one was Eric mentioned that team members really shine in the chat area that normally don't speak at a in-person meeting. I thought that was a really great observation.
Absolutely. This deals with inclusion.
Yeah.
And not everyone is sort of the gregarious, extroverted type to share their ideas, especially in a large training session or a large workshop. And that's a wonderful advantage of thinking virtual first. Absolutely.
And while we're waiting for more comments, I would like to also mention that while this type of interaction may be more inclusive, one of the barriers that we have to struggle with is the equality of internet access. Not everybody has high volume internet access. And in fact, today I am sitting in my office at the music library to do this presentation because my internet access at home is not reliable enough. I would have possibly, you might have lost me. So,
yeah,
I wanted to make sure that didn't happen. Now it could have happened here too, but it was less likely. And there are people I know, I've heard of students who are, trying to complete their undergraduate degree, and they're having to go to parking lots because they don't have internet access at home.
Yeah, there's this hub and spoke model of having an online experience, but the physical location of our institutions, of our libraries, can serve as gathering places. And if you think about in sports, when most people can't attend a football game at the stadium that it's actually at, but there is a really great experience when you go to your local pub or your bar to watch that and share that together, have a beer, and connect with people who are local. There's a model for that when it comes to learning and development that I believe we're going to be exploring as we move forward. The conference, say Charleston, for example, may take place in Charleston for those who can afford to go, but it won't be a second class experience for those who can't. And to have groups of sort of spokes of host institutions who can host sort of local, sort of regional events that can be driven to. I think we're going to be exploring this much deeper out of necessity.
Yes, a hybrid model is where we're headed. And I think that perhaps our presentation seems obvious to some of you, but I think that when Tony and I started talking about this a few months ago, we realized that it isn't always that obvious to people. And one of our commenters here, Molly, mentions how the virtual conference is much more accessible for her personal and health circumstances. And for me personally, that's true too for this year. I've never had that problem before, but if I'd had to come to Charleston this year, ironically, I would have had a hard time because I'm having some mobility issues. And so I'm happy to be here virtually. Let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, meeting in person is much more useful, engaging. Yes, of course it is. And I think that's why the hybrid model is the best option. And that we can continue to explore what that means. Let's see. Somebody wanted to know more about Skilltype. And I know we don't have time to go into that, but people, if the folks in the audience are interested, they can engage with Tony either directly or through one of the private chats. I think you're allowed to do that. Yeah, sure. So you could follow up with him on that. Let's see, what else do we have here? What will be the range of skills for the training being contemplated?
Yeah, so I can take this one. This sort of ties in. So when we were working on Skilltype, we looked at over 20 different core competency frameworks across libraries globally. There's, believe it or not, over 700 different skills that a librarian, a modern information professional can perform. And that's, it's ranging across, not just librarianship and galleries and archives and museums, but also the non-librarianship related work that we have to do in our organization. So about 30% of our jobs in a research library are not librarianship. They're related to business and IT and HR and other things. And so it's there's a lot of skills that are needed, and don't even get into sort of data analysis in the entire sort of world of data. So the range of skills that we need in our organizations today are vast.
Okay, then there's another comment here, again from Eric. Several folks I know have subscribed to Masterclass, a training resource where celebrities teach their craft. Yes. Yeah. As working in the music library, I've become aware and familiar with that whole concept. Wouldn't that be cool if we had a masterclass for like? Yeah,
I could see Eric delivering a masterclass on, API integration or things. And absolutely, that's part of how conferences get a draw is through who's presenting. And I think something we need to think about is how do we allow that expert to get access to the audience of people who want access to that person without the bottleneck. And so, no, great reference to Masterclass there.
Lynn says we miss the human connections, and we definitely do.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, and that's why we have this year with COVID and seemingly going into the next year. It's a special opportunity that I don't think we'll ever have again, where we're all sort of grounded. We can't fly, we can't do what we normally do. We should take advantage of this opportunity to prepare for the time when we can gather again and meet in person again, and do so in a way that is more equitable, more diverse, more inclusive, more accessible, more affordable. But fully agree. We miss each other as well.
Yes. I have a coworker, I mean, not a coworker, but a colleague in another town who is participating in the conference, but she's home with a head cold. She doesn't have COVID, but she has a head cold. And so I was thinking, one of the pluses of doing it this way is if you're sick, you can still participate without, spreading your germs. And you won't have to wear a mask. That's the other thing is I'm not surprised. I will not be surprised if in a year from now, we'll still be doing that. It's hard to know.
Yeah, I know we're right at the top of the hour, and I do see one other one from Ellen Endress is a vendor. She says, as a publisher, it's really important to meet my customers face to face. The virtual vendor showcase is a nice option, but we rely on our customers to stop in rather than meander by our booth. I really miss seeing customers and colleagues in person. I can't speak on behalf of folks who are running a virtual conference right now. It's a tall order, and you got to commend what they've been able to do under such short notice. But I think we could all agree that we can learn from these experiences and design something that's better moving forward. We're not going to settle for what we're doing today. I don't think anyone would agree with that.
Right. Well, this was a very quick 30 minutes.
It was. And our contact information is on the slide. Please be in touch in case you have questions about our work. And I hope everyone has a good virtual conference and stay safe this week and this month. Good to see everyone.
All righty. Take care. Bye-bye.